As a gay child of the early aughts, I obviously kept up with the hit musicals of my era. My friends and I sang along to Wicked. Don't judge me. On the drive to and from school. We all memorized Rent's La Vie Boheme, and I wound up singing absolutely the worst song from Avenue Q as my audition piece for the college musical. I don't know how I know, but I'm gonna find my purpose. I say all this to emphasize how deep my love for Avenue Q runs, or ran, before we talk about how one well-intentioned song from this musical exposes the corrupt, racist heart of centrism in the middle of the supposedly radical liberal New York theater scene. But before we can discuss the corrosive influences of centrism and racism, we need some working definitions. And I need to give at least a dozen political scientists an aneurysm. I beg of you, if you have any background in political science, turn away now. Centrism is defined by its relationship to other political philosophies and tendencies, and, in the US, is basically synonymous with being a moderate of either party. Yes, I know there's more than two parties, so put away your rambling comment, Ralph Nader. There are a lot of competing models for just how many different types of political affiliation we have here in the States, but my life is going to be a lot easier if I don't have to distinguish between enterprisers, social conservatives, bystanders, disaffecteds, and so on. So, very broadly, let's say that modern American politics has divided itself into three main camps. Conservatives, who fight to maintain an imaginary, idealized vision of past perfection. Liberals, who fight to change society for the better. And centrists, who don't fight for anything, and just want everyone to get along. Historically, this has meant centrists are interested in changing some things to improve the lives of the majority, while avoiding radical change, to preserve the really important things like police brutality, or having almost the least efficient healthcare system in the world. Given this context, isn't centrism just conservatism with extra steps? Well, at least one researcher examining world values and European values surveys has found that self-identified centrists are less supportive of democracy than any other political alignment, and are second only to self-identified far-right respondents in supporting authoritarianism. So... Yep. As someone who was smugly centrist well into my late 20s, I know that may sound regressive. Moderates like to believe they are exactly what they say they are. Moderate. They're fans of compromise. They're realists. The people who get past gridlock and get things done. But the fact is, politics is a war for survival for some people. And if you're not against the literal fascists who would happily have you murdered by a white supremacist mob, then you're a reason why American democracy is failing at its basic job of ensuring life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for all of its citizens. If you think you can compromise with the modern Republican Party apparatus, then they've already won the next election and gutted any chance for the US to reduce or eliminate the active oppression of, well, anyone who isn't white, straight, cishet, heteronormative, non-disabled, and rich. Now, I'm hoping that by now it's pretty uncontroversial to say that Avenue Q, the smash hit about puppets in New York that is totally legally distinguishable from Sesame Street, has a few problems with it. It features then living and now deceased exploited child actor Gary Coleman as the comic relief superintendent and sole black character. It also features a Japanese immigrant speaking in an exaggerated fake accent, who is named, of all things, Christmas Eve, presumably because a native Japanese speaker would struggle to pronounce every part of that name in the same way an American would. There's a shrill, closeted gay puppet living with his unrequited crush. And there's even a romantic rivalry between a fuzzy monster puppet named Kate Monster and a performer puppet named Lucy. There's problems there, okay? But for this essay, I need to dig down real deep on just one teensy tiny little song that made its way into the public imagination almost as much as the internet is for porn. That's right, we have to ruin an inspirational quote from everyone's favorite former FBI director, James Comey.
Maybe it's a fact we all should face. Everyone makes judgments based on race.
So, I'm not going to go through the song line by line. If you want that, and I don't blame you. Let me direct you to the Genius page for this song, which is a fascinating attempt to neutrally discuss a topic which does not lend itself to neutrality. Instead, let's jump ahead to some of the things highlighting what makes this song so hard to listen to these days. So, let's just outline what happens real quick. At this point, the show's protagonist, Princeton, is a fresh-faced college graduate learning to live in his new neighborhood with Gary Coleman and his new crush, Kate Monster. After Kate shares her dream of founding a school just for other monsters, who in this world are puppets, distinguishable only by being fuzzy, and all sharing the last name Monster. Anyway, Princeton asks Kate at this point if she's related to another resident named Trekkie Monster, to which she responds, "I find that racist." Yes, and here is our first real anti-racist, or racist, joke. Isn't it funny how she can just declare something racist? Isn't Princeton an idiot for not knowing the history of puppet racism? She says it like Michael Scott declaring bankruptcy! And Princeton only tries to apologize for a second before playing a game of gotcha, where he calls her out as racist for dreaming of a school for monsters. Aha! They've found a common ground and agree that they're both racist, and proceed to have fun, being racist with each other. That gets us this wonderful line. That's right, our relatable, naive young hero has now decided to make a lighthearted joke about how all Americans should speak English, despite us not having legally an official language, and billing ourselves as, a country of immigrants. But anyway, we're about to hit the crux of the problem with this song, and it pops up right after Gary Coleman shows up to call them out for being racist pieces of shit. Instead of apologizing for perpetuating harmful stereotypes, Princeton tells Gary Coleman that he's racist too, because Gary loves telling Pollock jokes. Because we live in a world of perfect centrist harmony, Gary Coleman realizes the error of his ways and accepts that he should just let people be racist. After all, bigotry has never been exclusively white. Alright, here's the moment I'm sure wish we could all avoid, where yet another white dude defines racism for you. I don't want to do it, you don't want to hear it, but it's an indispensable part of any argument about structural racism. The Gary Coleman character here is forced to spread a pernicious and commonly held theory that racism is simply bigotry based on racial identifiers. Webster's defines bigot as a person who is obstinately or intolerantly devoted to his or her own opinions and prejudices, especially one who regards or treats the members of a group, such as a racial or ethnic group, with hatred and intolerance. Meanwhile, it describes racist as a derivative of racism, and defines racism as, well, a few things. First, racism describes, quote, a belief that race is a fundamental determinant of human traits and capacities, and that racial differences produce an inherent superiority of a particular race. Behaviors or attitudes that reflect and foster this belief, racial discrimination or prejudice. End quote. Now, all that is just the first definition. And the secondary meanings include, quote, the systemic oppression of a racial group to the social, economic, and political advantage of another, end quote. So, right off the bat, we can see this line equating bigotry and racism as if they're the same thing is missing the mark, based just on the dictionary definition. But dictionary definitions aren't the ultimate scripture on a word's meaning. In academic circles, the consensus on what racism is has shifted around through the years, but academics tend to rely on the power plus prejudice theory, which posits that racism is the combination of actual prejudice and the social, political, and actual capital used to embed that prejudice in society. So, under this definition, Gary Coleman telling a Pollock joke would not be racist because Gary Coleman was not doing anything to systematically disadvantage Polish people. Now, there are plenty of academics and way, way more conservative snake oil salesmen who disagree with the prejudice plus power definition. The author of How to Be an Anti-Racist, Professor Ibram X. Kendi, mostly sticks to that definition, but includes some interesting nuance in how he defines key terms related to racism. For example, he defines racist ideas in the following way.
There is no such thing as a not racist idea, only racist ideas and anti-racist ideas. A racist idea is any idea that suggests one racial group is inferior or superior to another racial group in any way. An anti-racist idea is any idea that suggests the racial groups are equals in all their apparent differences, that there is nothing right or wrong with any racial group.
He also repeatedly defines his own past thoughts about blackness and black culture as explicitly racist, even calling his prologue
My Racist Introduction.
And his book describes his struggle to turn racist thoughts into anti-racist thoughts and actions. But back to the world of musical theater in the early 2000s. Having established that even our token black person can be racist, the song now gets an opportunity to make fun of people who strive to reduce harmful language and microaggressions by calling out the one character in an interracial marriage when he accidentally calls his Japanese-American wife Stephanie A. Jones, in her 2017 dissertation for the City University of New York's Doctor of Philosophy program, positions this scene as a way to tell the audience that the only cure for accidental racism is apology and forgiveness. But I always saw this as much more detached. The joke here, if we can call it that, is essentially asking the audience, ha, isn't it so funny that this stereotypical character is offended by her husband of all people, using an old-fashioned word. And, well, is it funny? Is it made any funnier when, moments later, Christmas Eve gets to go on her own mostly racist tirade? In a world where a sitting Republican congresswoman believes that California wildfires were caused by Jewish space lasers, it's hard to see how any of this was ever funny or liberal or unifying, much less a runaway Broadway success. And from there, we get to the conclusion of this piece, which can be neatly summed up in one awful line, echoing more than a decade's worth of pushback against those people who dared question our racist norms. In a future video, I may explore my fraught relationship with a series of books called The Politically Correct Fairy Tales, and dig into the history of being anti-politically correct. But for now, I feel comfortable just saying this is the thesis statement of this entire song, and is meant to impart the song's moral lesson. And yes, I can hear you all the way in the back, Strawman Steve. I hear you saying, "But it's ironic. There's no real moral lesson. They're just spoofing Sesame Street. I mean, they've got a song called The Internet is for Porn, for God's sake." And to you, I say, hey, are you ever gonna start chipping in for rent or food or anything? Because, you can't just sleep here forever. But I also say, to you and everyone championing that defense, no. As Stephanie Jones and many others have noted, you can't just pretend that everything in a musical comedy is satire, or irony, or utterly incapable of conveying a lesson to its audience. This show has several lessons it earnestly shares, criticizing the state of denial and self-loathing of the closeted homosexual, reminding people that dreams are worth pursuing even if they're hard, and concluding with an optimism for the future where surely everything will be better because George W. Bush isn't in office. As Stephanie Jones also noted in her dissertation, this musical number explicitly conveys a message that the cure for racism is, quote, contact with otherness, sufficient to get to know people of color enough to get beyond racism with them, to demonstrate one's good intentions in politics while everyone works through their individual feelings of being offended, end quote. Notably, this does not place any responsibility on white people to, I don't know, maybe not say things that further harm and marginalize people of color. Nor is it really a useful lesson for white people most of the time. Should white people get a thicker skin when discussing racism? Yes, absolutely. But we should all be able to discuss racism in order to address its pernicious effects. But that doesn't mean black people should just shut up whenever they encounter a white person spouting familiar aggressions, micro or otherwise. As Professor Kendi said in How to Be an Anti-Racist,
like fighting an addiction, being an anti-racist requires persistent self-awareness, constant self-criticism, and regular self-examination.
This song stands in opposition to doing the hard work of being an anti-racist, and in so doing places itself squarely in the center of American compromise politics. It envisions a world where the radical left and the radical right are both equally wrong in their approaches, and just need some gentle steering to get themselves back on course. But the world doesn't work like that, and no reform is achieved by believing we're utterly incapable of radical change. We wouldn't have the 40-hour work week without sustained, insistent activism and an unwillingness to compromise people's well-being for the sake of pleasing a few billionaires. Seeking a compromise with racists can only get you to the world that Avenue Q envisions, where people don't fight about racism, sure, but they also just keep being racists. Asking the underprivileged and oppressed to compromise on the quality of their lives simply to avoid having to feel uncomfortable when talking about the sensitive subject of race doesn't split the baby down the middle. It steals the baby away and gives it to the wrong mother. Everyone is a little bit racist, and the world's not going to get better by ignoring that. We should all endeavor to live in a world of anti-racists, because without a healthy dose of radical anti-racist liberals showing us the potential power we have as citizens, the world's not going to get even a smidge better for anyone who isn't in the top 1%. Give us a stimulus. Raise the minimum wage. Make Ted Cruz resign and put Trump in jail. Send a message that the government isn't just a place for rich people to play around until they get bored and go back to stealing money from other rich people. And show us that it is a serious, dedicated system made to uplift the citizens of this nation. Alright, thanks all for joining me. Do the standard YouTube stuff, like, subscribe, comment. Apparently comments are really big for driving engagement, so comment the hell out of it. I am really glad to finally be able to put this together, sort of testing more of my video editing skills. I thought I had audio on lockdown, but apparently I just blew out my lapel mic for all of the lapel mic recording I did, so that's not great. And I hope you had fun and got some good further reading to do out of this. There is always a lot of work to be done to be an anti-racist. Thank you. Could it be? Yes, it could. Something's coming, something good. Nope, that didn't feel good. Oh well, I'll be fine with the last take.